Hello and welcome to Izeybot's Pizza Reviews, where I take media I've seen and rank it 0 out of 8 and go slightly in depth on my reasonings why. Slight spoilers ahead for Star Wars The Acolyte, a recent show premiering on Disney+. All 8 episodes are now out on the streaming service, and I thought I'd put in my 2 cents, seeing as out it's been getting a lot of discourse lately from the Star Wars fandom and casual viewers alike. I do have a list of topics and some notes to go off of, but most of this is going to be off the cuff, so bear with me if this comes out a little disorganized. My first praise for the show, it has to be the fight choreography and the lightsaber battles. They obviously put in a lot of work, and I honestly believe it when they said they were really trying to emulate the Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi fight from Episode 1. They managed to capture the very fast-paced and visceral combat from Episode 1, which we'd all been hoping for, whereas the recent Star Wars stuff like Ahsoka or Obi-Wan or even the sequel series just didn't manage to capture. It was a semi-common occurrence in other Disney Plus shows that if you were struck or hit by a lightsaber and happened to be a main character, it wouldn't even really be a problem because, you have plot armor. But especially in the 5th episode with that first big lightsaber confrontation, you got to see a lot of people get hurt and killed by the main antagonist with a lightsaber, so it felt kind of refreshing in a little bit of a morbid way to see lightsabers actually be a dangerous threat. While so many people rightfully latched onto the 2 major lightsaber battles, I also really appreciated the level of choreography that went into the different fistfights throughout the show, especially in the final episode when May and Osha fought each other even though they're played by the same actress. I noticed in a recent Star Wars show, Ahsoka, that Dave Filoni took a lot of references from samurai films when choreographing and stylizing the narrative and the different fight scenes, and they did that here with Acolyte, and I actually really appreciated how well it was executed, especially with all the force powers that they involved in the fight scene itself. It was really stylistic, and I actually really liked it a lot. Lee Jung-jae and Manny Jacinto were stellar performances in this show. Apologies if I got those names wrong. And Amanda Sternberg was really great, especially considering she had to play 2 opposing characters, sometimes even in the same scene, which is a monumental task and something that must have been very intimidating when first starting out. In fact, all of the main cast definitely seemed like they put in a lot of time and effort into learning their fight choreography and different aspects of their characters, even though, as I'll get into later, sometimes it doesn't feel like they put it all to screen. Something that really stood out to me as a great aspect of the show, which I haven't seen too many people talk about, are the amazing costumes and set design. Especially after years of Star Wars shows being set on the volume to use as their backgrounds, I really appreciated the actual physical sets that the actors got to walk around on. I also really appreciated and enjoyed the world building that you could see in the background from the different aesthetics from the prequels and how everything looked a bit more older, a bit more golden age of the Jedi, especially since it fit with the High Republic aesthetic, which definitely works since this takes place about 100 years before the Phantom Menace. To get into some of the things that didn't quite work in my opinion, I really felt the dialogue at times was very clumsy or obtuse to try to deliver. Obviously this is a cast filled with talented actors, but in certain points throughout the show, the characters seemed like they realized that they were in a dream and just about to wake up, like the dialogue wasn't coming out totally naturally because it seemed somewhat forced. Obviously no disrespect to the actors at all because they're all very talented, but it seemed like the dialogue was purely written to just drive the story forward rather than give us an in-depth look at how our characters felt and acted. The words our characters speak shouldn't just be a method through which to progress a plot, it should also be a way in to see how their mind works. And I just felt like a lot of the dialogue here, outside of Master Soul, really didn't give us a sense of what our characters were like outside of their sole duties of being Jedi. I had a good idea of who Soul's character was because he had compassion for May and Osha, but for everyone else, it didn't really give us a sense of who they were outside of their duties to the Jedi Code. I understood Kamir's, the evil Sith guy's motivations, because he's in the end proven right. The Jedi Order in the show is portrayed as a very bureaucratic and internally corrupt organization which he wants to thwart, which is why his character is very easy to follow along with. The character progressions of May and Osha, the focal points of the show, are hard to follow because they switch places and then actually proceed to swap roles entirely without enough information given as to why their characters would make those choices. My final minor gripe with the show is that every single episode, or every start of the episode rather, they would flash the name of the planets we were currently on the screen, which sort of indicates that they didn't think you were smart enough to remember where the characters were the last episode ended. So it was a little aggravating, but it was pretty inconsequential. For my few major gripes I have, none of them really relate to Star Wars lore per se. I know a lot of the Star Wars fandom has been up in arms about May and Osha being conjured through the Force, which would thereby make Anakin Skywalker not as unique. But honestly, I didn't really find too many issues with it. I'm not huge on lore purity, so it didn't bother me much. But that's not part of my major gripes anyway. My first major complaint is actually with the use of the Force itself. I've said to my friends many times that I feel the Force is just the biggest plot device known to cinema, as it can really do anything that the writer requires, and this is no exception in The Acolyte. Sometimes the Force is used pretty creatively, especially in the fight scenes, but there are certain segments dotted throughout the show where certain characters will be wielding the Force, and it will just look like they're just making a really weird face and holding out their arms and straining themselves when nothing is really happening, so it looked a little goofy, to be honest. While the Force does look cool at some times with how it's used, other times it just looks very silly, and it's so obvious that the actors pretending to wield it are just sort of making a very angry stance and glaring at someone. I'll try to find some clips from the show just to show what I'm talking about. Another one of my main qualms with the show is that it tries to add too many new side plots too late in the series. The final episode especially adds, from the top of my head, 3 new aspects of the story that aren't really explained at all and weren't really set up throughout the entire rest of the show. There are 2 major characters, one Sith figurehead and one very important Jedi, who show up in the last episode who you would have thought would have started to play into the story earlier in the series. It was interesting to see them appear, but it didn't really make sense why they would appear then. And especially in that last episode, there's a side plot with a Senate Oversight Committee which had been set up earlier in the show in one of the first episodes, but was never revisited. The finale didn't quite stick the landing for me either, especially because the villainous turn of one of the characters didn't really feel earned, and it sort of came out of nowhere. And although the fights were really good and visceral, like how I mentioned earlier, it still left me wanting by the end of the episode, and I still felt unsatisfied as the credits started to roll. I got the sense that, as I was watching the show, the writers, directors, and producers were just as confused as I was as what the show was supposed to be, and they never really found it as the production kept going along. So in the end, it sort of was just a final product that had great elements, but was unsure of what it really wanted to be. I was wowed at some moments and left wanting at others, which is why I'm going to give this a 4 out of 8 slices. If I ever revisit the show, it'll only be to rewatch those lightsaber battles, and that's about it.